Somebody's got to have a question. Yes, ma'am.
I've got all your books, including the one on John Dee.
Oh, my extra credit. Good for you.
And I was wondering, what drew you to John Dee? And I know you found the missing manuscript in the library. Was there anything in there that surprised you?
It was so, the missing manuscript was such a non-starter, but okay. So John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer. And I'd always been fascinated with the Elizabethan period. And I always was sort of fascinated with him. He actually calculated the most beneficial day for her to get coronated, which turned out well, so that's good. He also told her that she would die in a palace by the water, which was less of a sort of risky move because most of her palaces were by the water, so we had a really good shot at that. But she was actually en route between two palaces and had to stop in a palace by the water when she was very, very elderly. She was almost 70. And she refused to lay down.
What do you mean?
In the Elizabethan period, trust me, it's not like that, always somebody like that in your class. But anyway, she was, by the standards of the time, quite elderly, and she refused to lay down because she felt that if she laid down, she would die in this palace, as he had foretold. So he had a really interesting, long-standing sort of relationship. And I just always found him fascinating because he was a sort of jack of all trades and a master of none. He was a horrible failure in all sorts of ways. He drove his wife crazy. He was always bankrupt. He had tons of children. He had one child. He wasn't sure if it was his or his assistant's because at one point he had started talking to angels through a crystal ball, and they said that the person who was actually holding the crystal ball was his assistant and seeing everything, and the angels told them that they should swap wives, since it's God's will. And so 9 months later, out popped a child, and John Dee didn't really know who it was, so he named it Theodore, gift of God, just to be safe. How can you not be interested in him, right? So that was what I did my doctoral dissertation, and I specifically did it on his conversations with the angels, so on the magic part of him. Because what people like to do was they like to focus, he wrote the first, worked on the first English translation of Euclid, and he was a mathematician, and he knew Greek, and he had the biggest library in England, so that's all really positive, but then it was like the angels were this kind of weird thing that nobody wanted to talk about. So I, of course, couldn't resist, and that's how I started working on John Dee. So, yeah, and so one of the things that John Dee had was the largest private library in England. It was bigger than the libraries at Oxford and Cambridge combined. So more than 2,500 volumes. And right before I did my dissertation, someone had gone around, actually two someones, the librarian of All Souls and the librarian at the Bodleian had gone around tracking down all of John Dee's books and listing their present whereabouts. And there was one book they couldn't find, and it was called the Book of Soiga. And I was looking for something else. This might start sounding familiar. I was looking for something else, and I opened up the catalog, and in the top corner of the corner, it said Alderaya or the Book of Soiga in Latin. And I thought, well, this is the Bodleian. That's where the guy who did the catalog is from. This can't be it, because he's the keeper of rare books. Presumably he would know. And I called it up, and I opened it, and it was this missing manuscript that no one had ever seen. And so I went, and I thought, okay, I'm totally hallucinating. So I wrote a note, and I just said, I think I found the Book of Soiga, and he told me later, everybody always kept finding the Book of Soiga. It was never it. And I went home, and I got in the next day, and there were like 5 librarians waiting, and they said, the keeper wishes to see you. And I thought, oh my God, I have arrived. And he came out, he said, you're the angel lady. And I said, yes. And it was the Book of Soiga. And then I found the other copy at the British Library, because once we had it, we could trace it using all kinds of bizarre technical things. So yeah, and then we opened it, and it was a complete disappointment. Nothing useful whatsoever. So it was like the Holy Grail, and it's like nothing. So that's why when I was looking, and that's why Diane finds a book at the library, but instead of it being nothing, it actually turns out to be really exciting, which was what everybody thought the Book of Soiga would be. It would be like the magic key to the universe of John Dee, but it wasn't. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you feel about your books being made into a TV show?
You're probably going to guess this. I have a lot of complicated feelings about it. And the reason for that is I don't have kids, but what I imagine is it's a little like, for those of you who do have children, it's like sending your kids off to school for the first time. You know, when you put them in the bus or whatever, or you take them to school, and then you wave at them as they walk away from you, and you think, please be okay as you go, you know. And so I feel a little like that some days, you know, where these are my babies, these are my kids, and I've entrusted them to other people. But it's also quite amazing and surreal to walk into a soundstage where there's 85 people who are all there because you sat in your pajamas and wrote a book once. And now they're all making this thing, and they all care about it, and they all ask you these questions, and it matters so much to them that they get it right, and they think about you guys all the time. So all I can say is, it's been such an enormous privilege to work with the cast and the crew. I would literally walk on hot coals for them. They care so much about the project and getting it as right as they can get it for TV. And I have now seen the first episode of the show with music, and you know, like there was a test pattern at the beginning. You remember the test pattern?
Yeah.
So it came up with a test pattern, and then it started, and across came the logo. I thought, oh my God, this is really happening. So and it's spectacular. It's so beautiful. You're gonna love it. It's really, really exciting. So you have moments like that where, just as what probably for those of you with kids, when you went to the recital or they got their honor roll or whatever, you know, and so it's that same sort of feeling. So it goes up and down, but that's like most things. Well, I don't know yet. I can't say. At somebody in an office somewhere will sign a memo, and then it'll get announced. You'll hear about it very early, I'm sure. Great questions. Other questions? Yes.
Do you know who will be narrating the time cover yet?
Great question. So the question is, do we know who's going to be narrating? So, as for those of you who bought the audiobook of The World of All Souls, you will probably hear my voice occasionally in there because I did some of it. And there were two other narrators because Jennifer Ikeda was not available. She's the one who did the 3 books in the trilogy. So she's a very busy lady and a very accomplished actress. And so we have asked her to please try to save time to do Times Convert. But the problem with it is this. We can't tell her exactly when we're going to deliver it to her. And she can't like keep the rest of her life open for us to like drop this large thing in her lap. So we're hoping we can make it all work. So fingers crossed. Think really good, like calendar gods thoughts that it's all going to work out. Because she's fantastic. But I picked Saskia Marlaveld, who did the World of All Souls, and I think she's terrific too. She's different, you know, so sometimes you'll hear the voices, you'll think, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like Gallo, you know, whoever used to sound. But then there's some things that I just love the way that she did it. So, you know, it's always good, you know, endings, beginnings change, just like Philippe said. We got to have all those things to keep going. So, great question. Anything else? You guys are being so shy and circumspect. Look, okay, yeah.
How many books do you think you're going to do in this book?
Gosh, that's a good one. That's a good question. Okay, so they say that there are 2 kinds of writers, plotters and pantsers. I'd never heard this until I became a writer. But it turns out that plotters are the ones who have a plan and then execute the plan. And then there are pantsers. And what pantsers do is they fly by the seat of their pants. And I'm kind of more of a pantser than a plotter, which is a long way of saying I'm not actually really sure. Because, and I say that because I have so many stories and I want to tell them in a good way that is worth it. So I never want to be the author who, when you walk into Barnes & Noble at the Grove and you look at the table and you go, oh my God, there's another one. I don't ever want to be that author. And so I only want to give you the stories that have a real reason. And you're all laughing like you know what I'm laughing. And so I never ever want to give you just another thing because it's another thing. I want it to be thoughtful, and I want it to make sense and make some kind of contribution and do something. So that sets a little bit of a different bar than just being like, yep, all right, let's do exactly what we did the last time. We're going to change the location and a couple of other things. Not that there's anything wrong with those books. I love a good cowboy bodice ripper as much as the next one. But you know, I do sort of really want to be thoughtful about it. And there are just people, like, I know I will write a Gallo Glass book at some point. I know, I can't imagine I won't at some point want to tackle Philippe and Isabeau. I definitely would want to write about Stephen and Rebecca and Sarah and M back in the day. Valerie Pettiford, who plays M, has already started saying, when is our spin-off series going to be? And so, you know, there's just so many stories to tell. So we'll just have to see how it goes. We'll see how you like Times Convert first of all, and see how you like exploring some of these other characters and their worlds. All right, well, if we are really done, then we're going to call... Oh, you're behind me. I'm terrible. I ignored you.
That's right. Okay, so as the world gets crazier and crazier out there and louder and louder, flatter and flatter, do you have to work hard to keep it out of your head when you're writing, or do you feel compelled to kind of address how the world is changing for those of us who aren't one of these three classifications of creatures?
Well, what's interesting about the books is that when I wrote these books, it seemed like we were going through one of those periods when things were getting better and better and better and better. But as a historian, what I know is that things get better and better and better and better, and then they get worse and they get worse and they get worse and they get worse, and then they get better and better and better. And you know, we can watch that over time. So what's really strange to me is that there are some ways in which the books I feel are more timely now than they were when they first came out, with the kind of ways that they talk about acceptance, and not just tolerance, but acceptance and embracing difference, and recognizing that that is actually why we survive. We only survive if we embrace difference and change. And you know, that is absolutely true. You would not be able to find many people who would really argue with that. But there are people who argue with it. And so I have to say, I do find it really hard to watch the news, because it just seems like it just seems like we still have so much work to do. And I was feeling like maybe we didn't have as much work to do, or we could kind of feel more. But we still have work to do. And maybe that's the story of the human race, that we always have work to do. I read the newspapers and I sort of check in on things, but I find that for me is better than watching all the news stations. I think the 24-hour news cycle is really, really not good for us. And I can't even really articulate why, but it's just like it is that you do feel like a vampire who's like, there's no end to it. It just keeps going on and on. So, I mean, that's a sort of an interesting thing to think about right there. You know, do vampires watch the news? That's what I'm going to be actually thinking about. Do they watch the news, or is it just like, oh God, yay, another one? Yeah. Oh, okay, yes.
Is there a lot of science in the new one coming out?
Is there a lot of science? There is a lot of medicine in the new one coming out. Yeah, right. So a lot of medicine and some magic. So that same sort of blend, because I do really kind of think that not surprisingly for somebody who worked on John Dee, I like to think that you really can't, as Matthew says, take the magic out of the science and the science out of the magic, that they're complementary systems. So it had to have some of that in there. There's not a whole lot of laboratory activity in the 18th century for Marcus, and Matthew and Diana are on summer break, and so you know, it's a little bit of a different vibe, but hopefully you'll like it. You'll like finding out yeah, there's lots of interesting history of science and medicine in that period. So, all right. Well, Lily, you're behind me too. Yes, ma'am.
Odd question, but is there any movie that has recently came out that you enjoyed?
Oh my God, Lily, do you know that the last time I saw a movie was with these two? Before Christmas, and that was like the first movie I'd seen in almost a year.
Just seen anything interesting? Like, I figure you're always so busy.
Yeah.
Doing.
You know, as a writer and a professional nonfiction reader for my day job as a historian, I don't have a whole lot of time to watch television or go to the movies, I have to say. Which is actually kind of, you know, people will talk about things now that I'm doing this show. Oh, it's like this, it's like that. And I'm thinking, and I'm writing things down going, I have to look at that. And you know, one of the things that's true is that I find it very difficult to watch other people's stories when I'm trying to hold my stories in my head. Yeah, it's like, it's weird. But I do love, there are some reality television shows. I've been known to run home on Tuesdays to watch a certain show. I just I just sit there and I stare at fascination. And it's just like, oh my God. So that's my sort of like soothing, relaxing moment. Every week for Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Yeah, don't tell my students that. Yes, right over here.
So since the TV show has come out and you've met the actors and actresses, has that changed how you view the characters as you're writing?
That's a great question. You know, when I was actually writing Part of Time's Convert on set in between takes at one point, and my editor said, Deb, Marcus's hair keeps turning brown because the actor who's playing Marcus has brown hair. And I'd be watching him on set, and suddenly his hair would turn brown in my manuscript, and then we'd bleach it out to blonde again, and everything would be fine. You know what it is that now, instead of hearing my voice when I write dialogue, I hear theirs.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So, and the people who are the real big sort of changes for me, because Teresa sounds very much like Diana did in my head. Matthew Good sounds very much like Matthew always did in my head. Lindsay Duncan's voice, the person who plays Isabel, she has the most amazing voice. And so now whenever I write a line of dialogue, I hear it in Lindsay's kind of gravelly, rough voice. And it's like, And the other person is our Alex Kingston and Valerie Pettiford, Sarah and Anna, because they are so their characters. And they have just embraced these characters in amazing ways. So, so it's really kind of fun. At one point, Alex went off to South Africa to do a play, and so she went out and she met with traditional healers and folk witches and folk healers and folk medicine practitioners in Africa, and she came back with all of this stuff to put in the bishop house. I mean, that's like the level at which, so it's really hard not to hear Alex Kingston and Val Pettiford when I'm writing their characters now. But that's kind of a nice, fun thing, I think, to have that be the consequence. Darkening hair and really good voices. Yeah. All right, let's sign some books for you guys. Thanks so much for listening.